halfway there. There we go. Welcome. So what we're going to do in the next 50 or 60 minutes or so is just look at an introduction to risk assessments. Although we are recording, it is also a virtual session, so we've just got to make sure we go through our standard process, just giving you an update around the professional surroundings, making sure that the video remains on so we're in contact. If you want to communicate, just join in with this session. Just speak up, unmute yourself and join in, Laura and Ad, and you, Emily, because I think discussion around these points is going to be really helpful for anybody in the future who watches it as well. So what's our main aim? So this has been a request for us to do some internal CPD, just to make sure that we are looking at increasing understanding of how, but also why we need to do risk assess and why we conduct them in SSG. So 3 key outcomes really. Identify reasons for risk assessments, identify how to complete a risk assessment, and then look at running through the process of completing it in with SSG. So hopefully that'll be quite relevant for you guys. As always, let's have a look at our starting point and our prior knowledge. I'm assuming rightly so that you've done this before, but we're just refreshing. So if you have a look at out of 10, 10 being amazing, against A, B and C, what would you put yourself down as and what would you score yourself? Again, 10 being the highest score. And either jot it down on paper or just pop it into the chat box. It's entirely up to you. Okay. So moving on then. Start a task. As always, let's get our brain into thinking around the topic that we're looking at, around hazards, and we're looking around the risk of these hazards. And it's not necessarily the specific environments or activities that you may well be managing this second, but the process is applicable across the board, whether you're a scaffolder or whether you are working in a kitchen. So take a little bit of time now just to have a look at this image. How many hazards can you find? So if I just give you a minute or so, how many variations and different hazards can you see within that? So just jot them down if you've got a piece of paper, or in the chat box if you want to write them down. This is the bit where we need some music. No, I'm not going to sing. Give you a few more seconds just to have a glance at them and see if you can start to offer some up.
Do you want us to say them out loud?
Yeah, go on, might as well, if you know them now.
The fire door's propped open.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? No, you won't.
Yeah, perfect, yeah. It's something that happens regular. Shouldn't happen, but it does. And I think that it's one of these minor ones until somebody comes around to inspect you and explains why. It's quite obvious why, really, isn't it? What else have we got in there?
Someone standing on a chair to try and get to the top shelf on.
Yeah. So it's standing on top of something is not the problem. What is the problem? State the obvious to everybody.
That is a moving chair.
Yeah. It not just moves on wheels, but it's, I think that signal there, Emily, was a swivel chair. It spins as well. By you, Laura, have you got any?
Someone's dropped a hot water something.
Yeah,
coffee, tea, whatever it is.
something. Yeah. What about some less obvious ones?
Bags left on the floor.
Yep, bag left on the floor.
Over.
There's a warning symbol on that box. Just tipping it out.
Yeah. So you can't quite see what that is, but I'm guessing that would be something like printer toner or something. It's probably the more dangerous chemical that you might have in an office. Yeah. So there are other things here which you would go into, which are even more kind of discreet here, where you've got things such as stress, anxiety, mental health, whatever that may well be going on down in the bottom, eye strain possibility. You've got sunlight, direct sunlight coming in and affecting, even down to having foliage like real plants in an environment, because sometimes people have an allergy or an allergic reaction to it. Some plants can be toxic if they're ingested or if they're touched, and so on and so forth. So it can be things that are not as obvious that need to be considered as a hazard. Yeah. So just a bit of fun, just to get our brains warmed up. Moving on to what is a risk assessment. So if I was to ask you that question, what would you throw out? So if we were going to define it, or even add some keywords, what would we put in there?
A
Hazard.
A hazard. Okay. Yeah.
Assessment. I know that is the word.
something that you would put in place to reduce the risk of potential injury to.
That's more than a word, just something.
I like it though, Ad. Good. I like the word reduce, and reduce the risk and what you're already talking, putting things in place. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, Emily. So that's allowed. Thank you.
So again, just putting it into, so RA is obviously risk assessment. So it's systematic. So this process is almost a kind of a machine process. It happens the same way every time for every element that we do risk assessment. There is forms are in place. There is a process that you follow that is in place, and that's what we do. So what we're not doing is we're not saying complete a risk assessment, Laura, and you are guessing what the outcome is of that risk. There is set procedure, and same with you, Ad. You're not filling it out on a template that you've filled in yourself. It's a set format. And Emily's fully aware, because she's done these time and time again. They also need to be done within a period of time and a lead up to a program. Okay, so then looking at this, it allows for a trusted employee. So this is something that you'll not necessarily see in definitions, but it is definitely something we have at SSG, because what we mean by trusted employee is that they are not going to have one eye on the clock and seeing how long it is for them to complete this task. They're not going to rush it. They're not going to skip over it and try cutting corners. They have to be trusted in order to be able to identify the not so obvious and the potential of it. And sometimes that can be quite challenging, because to put actions in place normally will cost finance, will normally cost replanning or time or effort. And to say this is not suitable to run, whether it be an activity session, whether it be a large game fair event or anything in between, it's really important that we can trust people to make a decision and point out accurate things, rather than writing down what it will be when the actions are in place. It needs to be before. Okay, and it's to identify the obvious hazards for injury or illness. So this is something, so you identified it there, Ad, about the injury to somebody getting hurt, but it's also an illness as well, and we've got to be kind of aware of that. And I think we're all fully aware with what the 18 months we've just been through with the kind of pandemic around hygiene and looking at the restrictions that were in place, and everything that we have done, and Emily mainly has done in your department, has been born from risk assessment and looking at the starting point of what do we need to put in place. We then need to look at evaluating the possible risks. Okay, so the hazard is there, then what is the risk of that hazard taking place? And as a result of that, is there a severity of that? against the projected activity or undertaking. Yeah. So hopefully this will work. What I thought is we'll start with HSE's version of this. It's just a 2.5 minute video. Okay, so HSE is the Health and Safety Executive. It's the government arm that looks after all this as a statutory body. Please tell me if you can't hear this. I will try again.
Can't hear
You
it.
hear that?
No.
You can't hear that. Bear with me 1 second then. Because I can hear it on this end here, so I need to. Apologies, guys. It's probably because I'm on shared screen. If I, to save time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop that link into the chat box. Okay. You copy and paste that into URL, and if you watch it through there, and then what I'll do is I'll play it on now on the screen because we're recording. Yeah. Have you got that? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so when you guys have finished watching your clip, you just give me a thumbs up or shout out and tell me. For recording purposes, if that didn't work, obviously pause this screen, type in the HTTPS into your URL, and then you'll be able to watch the clip. Cheers, Ad. Thanks, Laura. And Emily. Brilliant. Okay, so did that all make sense? It's quite a simple wrapped around footage that identifies what we're looking for. Moving on to the reasons for risk. So the reason within SSG and wider is that it's a statutory responsibility. So every company within the UK. In order for that to remain a safe practice and health and safety, we need to do risk assessments. As the video stated, we don't necessarily have to keep evidence of that if you've got less than 5 people. So obviously we do, because we are upwards of 70 people, okay? So we need to make sure that we are covering off the mitigated risks. So we are putting in things that we can say are so obvious, they're dangerous, and we are going to lower the danger. We are going to lower the chance of that hazard hurting somebody. We must be able to evidence it, obviously, and then we need to be ready in case we want to be inspected. We need to be inspected, okay? And that's all because of the statutory responsibility. And especially you guys now are working with local authorities much more now as well. So this will become a much more important element externally. We've always done it as an important internally, but externally for activities as well. Just like when schools ask for certain things, contracts will be asking for them regularly now. Insurance companies, they require them. So this is in order to prevent and minimise liability claims. So if you've ever had the unfortunate business of having to go through and support against an insurance claim, then one of the first things your solicitors will ask for straight away is, can you show me your risk assessment and your planning and procedures to show that we have thought about things before they've gone ahead. It saves us money as a company because, again, it minimises the knock-on effect of claims. It also minimises the aftermath of somebody getting hurt, maybe a staff member being sick or injured off work, and also like the loss in earnings through loss of contracts, because we've got to display professionalism, but also it protects our employers and our visitors. So if people are repeatedly banging heads on bouncy castles, they're not going to return for an inflatable party. That has been a decade since those risk assessments were changed and in place now. Although it is the last bullet point on this, it is obviously the first in our mind why we do it. So we're looking after our staff, after everybody who works for us, including unpaid volunteers, maybe people on work placement who are a bit younger, but also visitors. And that may well be somebody who comes into the centre for a meeting. And again, COVID has highlighted this, where we have processes to meet and greet, walk them through what they can and can't do, where they can and can't go, signing in, X, Y, and Z. Okay. At any point, guys, questions, throw them out. Don't wait till the end. Okay. How to complete a risk assessment then? So I broke it down into 5 steps, and 5 processes are quite regularly known within health and safety areas. The first one is to actually identify the hazard. Okay, anything that may cause you or somebody else some harm. Now, there is lots, but there is also things that we don't know that aren't easy to see. Okay, we're not going to get pulled up on that. But if it is obvious, and if it is something that we should have got called up on, we have to justify why we didn't identify it. And that's where we've got to make sure that the right people are doing these risk assessments, and also that we're following and getting it signed off. Okay. Step 2, once we've identified something, we're going to decide who it is who may be harmed. Okay. So if we identified, I don't know what it was. It was it a handbag in the cartoon? It was something in the walkway that could be a trip hazard. So a trip hazard is probably the most famous, slip, trip, falls on a risk assessment. Who would be harmed and how? Well, anybody within that office space moving around could trip over that bag. Okay. How? Well, we've just stated it, haven't we? That they could trip. Assess the risks and take action. So is it something that is likely to hurt somebody? And is it going to occur quite often? Yes, because if there's something in the way, people are going to trip over it. It's obvious. Okay, so we need to do something about that. So telling somebody to move it out the way, That is a live risk assessment. And that would be part of what are we putting in place to make sure that the action is going to happen. Well, whoever is working as line manager that day just needs to keep an eye on the environment and tell everyone, or the company owners need to provide a staff room where all bags are able to be left. Do you understand what I mean? So what we're doing is we're putting things in place so there's no way that they can just be left in the way. And the bag is just the first example in my head. Make a record of the findings. So again, it's evidence that it's just not perfectly safe because that's the way of the world. It's safe because Adam Lewis has gone round and made it safe. Okay. And then review the risk assessment. Now, this is something that we're quite good at, and we're good at it because we're made to do it. Okay. Is that we review our risk assessments. So before programs start, we then go through them and take advantage of what's happened before and say, is it working or not? And if it isn't, change it. Okay, any questions? Cool. So I've mentioned a couple of words already about the likelihood. There is an equation that we would use in our forms. Doesn't have to be used externally, a judgment, but in order to help you guys make a judgment about what is a low risk and what is a high risk, we put in a really simple kind of equation. So the likelihood times by the severity is your risk level. So what is that? That's how probable is it that it's going to happen, okay, out of 5. And then what would the consequences of that be will then give you your priority level. Okay, so this has been taken directly from the forms that we use, if you've not seen one already. So tripping over a handbag, how likely is that in the office? Well, we've got several places to walk. We've got several people with handbags. So actually it could be quite likely. 3. If they were to trip over the bag, how much injury would they sustain? How hurt would they be? What's the severity of it? So no injury, well, no, I think it's more than that. Minor injuries, yeah, possibly they could trip and stumble. You could even say that it might be up to 3 days because they might twist an ankle or fall on a wrist and hurt themselves. So if we were to say that somebody is likely to break a bone, for example, then we're looking up and into the 3-4s now. If we were to do that equation, so if we go 3 times 3, it's 9. It's right on the verge of low. If we were to push it into the 4, it goes to 12, then we're in the medium. So what are we going to do to drop that down to a low? Well, we're going to tell everybody, please put your bags in the locked kitchenette, or have a locker and please use it there, or put your bag in your drawer under your desk. And that is what we have put an action in place to lower down the risk level. That makes sense? Yeah. All good, Laura? Yeah, cool. So just as an example, this is a screenshot of a document I emailed out to you last night. Okay. A template, and this is a template for a previous one for a live assessment. And the key thing around this is that you've got your tally and your key at the top for your equation. You've got the top left, which is telling you where it's going to be risk assessed, what area, what room, what department, who's completed it and signed it off. Okay. The date it was done and then the year. So you change that to the academic year 2021 or 21-22, whenever it is you're using. And then you've got the set columns. So in each of these columns, there needs to be information. So the most common confusion, it's not an error, it's just a confusion, is between this column here, really. Okay, the hazard or the event. All right, so slip, trip, fall is perfect. That's a hazard. Okay. People people are not necessarily a hazard. Okay, violent action or unknown visitor, okay, that could be a hazard. Does that make sense? So if we were just to write people, it could be anything. It needs to be quite specific when you're looking in that. Who's affected? Quite often it would just be a kind of a staff, but it could be a lot of people. So if we were to put in there swimming pool and drowning, well, that would be a staff member and a participant or student. Okay, we wouldn't say that the risk is to a visitor. Okay, in order for a visitor to drown, they've got to have accessed the water, so they've got to have tripped over, fallen, been pushed in. That's a different hazard, isn't it? Yeah. If we go to the next one, risk controls, measures in place to prevent the harm being realised. So what's already in place that you're seeing? So let's use the pool again, drowning. So ratios, staff to people, to participants are high. You've got dry side staff members watching the water. You've got all your staff in the building fully trained, okay, and aware what to do. You've got emergency procedures in place. You've got first aiders on scene to minimize the severity of it, okay? So once you're looking at those risk controls, you're then going to look in these columns. So what's the chances of somebody drowning? Well, it's high because there's a large pool of water and there is some non-swimmers learning to swim. What's the consequence? Well, actually, they could die. So it's the highest consequence. So your overall score, and then that gives you a priority in here. And it should, if you've got the right template, should just populate that for you already. Like work it out on an Excel sheet. The responsibility, who's responsible for this? So it would be your dry side team leader or whatever you call it, your pool attendant. And then the action required. So this action required here is going to minimize this risk, because what you would put in there is so important for everybody on that session day to follow. Because you would say, what are we calling our swim teachers now? Our lead. So I'll get my terminology right.
What, in the pool, the lead?
Yeah, who goes dry side and who's leading everything?
So we've got the project lead who is
There you go.
on the side.
Yeah. So project lead. So you would name them. You would say project lead responsibility, project lead action required. Check all lighting in the pool and outside the pool so you can see everything. Register everybody into the pool and out of the pool so you know where everybody is at all times. Make sure that you do a pre-session briefing with staff to check that they're all okay and they're with it and they're suitable for work and they're ready to go and they've got no questions. Debrief staff to make sure that any near misses have been identified and where they can improve on, okay? Time scales for these, well, this would be one day, this would be daily or every session. And then when it's completed or regular checks, you would put in there, actually, it's going to be regular. Every single session, we want these things to be done. For something like an event, it may be that you don't need to do certain things every single day because the fencing around the game fair area is secure, it's been checked, and that's fine. What we'll do is we'll add an action that every morning somebody will just walk around the perimeter of the fence to make sure it's not blown over. That's it. And then we wouldn't have kids escaping. The link is here to where these are saved. Okay, it's up here, but I've already passed that on to you, and I'll drop it into the chat box again if you need it. So how to complete a risk assessment then. So a bit more of a task for you. Just take 3 or 4 minutes, a bit longer if you need. Okay. In a second, I'm going to give you the opportunity to review this image and identify just one hazard. Try and be a bit quirky with it. Don't just pick the obvious one. Complete the first row of a risk assessment template, which had previously been emailed. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to look at filling in each for these columns for row 1 for one hazard. Yeah. After that, we're just going to feedback nice and quick, just so again, the recording people can get some examples back from management, what we've done. Any questions? Okay, so I've chosen a generic office. Couple of minutes. Off you go. If you're watching the recording, you might want to forward a few minutes just while we pause. Just give you 1 more minute just to finish off that, and then we'll feedback it. Okay. Anybody want to jump in first off? Share? Go on then, Laura. You look like you're edging to go. You're on mute.
I had the fan heater under the desk.
Fan heater under the desk. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so it can affect, I put staff and I put possibly visitors and contractors if they're like given somewhere to work.
Yeah, cool.
Measures in place to stop it from being realised would be it needs to be on a flat surface. It should be somewhere secure and not on the floor where it can be pushed over.
Yeah, brilliant.
And then I was just still doing the numbers bit when you asked me.
That's okay. So would you say out of 5, what would it be? 5 being it's gonna happen. There's gonna, do you know what I mean? There's the likelihood of it something happening.
Yeah, I put 3 for that one because it.
So
may happen.
if you were thinking about it now, because everything you've set up to now is perfect, it's fine. But what is it about the heater? Because the heater itself is a completely safe piece of equipment.
Can cause a fire.
It causes fire, yeah. So it's positioning of heater, isn't it?
Yeah.
Inappropriate positioning of heater. Because the heater itself is fine, unless it is a really old one and it doesn't have a switch off when it falls over. Okay.
Yeah.
So what we could then start saying is, well, it could cause fire. If there's any materials near to it and it's left on, near the floor, like a waste paper bin, it could cause a fire. It could get really, really hot and burn somebody, like their legs. So if somebody's sat with bare legs underneath the desk, it could burn them because it's close. It's going to be really hot in there.
I did that working from home.
Did
I was
you?
in my conservatory, had my heater on, and I had my shorts on and burnt my leg on it.
Oh dear. I'm being recorded, so I'll not comment, Ad. All right. So that, what you're doing there, you've spotted it right. The danger's there, but you've got to be just a little bit more specific with that kind of danger-ish. So there, the heater is inappropriately placed. Good. So low. What about the high likelihood that someone's going to get hurt, or low? I think it'd be low. I think it'd be really low. It's still a risk. It's still definitely got to be on our form because we're looking at that environment, aren't we? So it's got to be there. We then recorded that. So how are we going to mitigate that risk? Because the severity is, if there's a fire, that's really serious. Okay, it's a hazard. So how are we going to mitigate that? How are we going to lessen the risk?
Putting that it has to be, it's only allowed in certain places, so on like a stable ground.
Yeah.
Can only be used, for 2 hours, and it has to be turned off from different
Perfect.
settings.
So you're already thinking about that. I know it's quite hypothetical right now. If you have a repeat offender where they keep moving it, then putting a taped cross on the carpet.
Yeah.
That's where it lives. It's on there. So then there can be no confusion. You've chosen to move it from there. Okay. And therefore you have broken the risk assessment because it says the heater needs to be placed on Red Cross. You've gone against one of our documents and therefore you have chosen to do that. I'm sorry, staff member. Cool. What about you, Em?
I did the boxes on top of the filing cabinet.
Oh, okay, cool.
Depending on if they're heavy, well,
Yeah.
just high stacking in general that isn't secure storage is a hazard, which could affect staff working in that area or visitors. Someone leans against there, they could fly off.
Yeah.
I put it as a 3 of likely and then a 3 of potential consequence.
Okay.
Depending on what's in it, I guess.
Mm.
Would be responsibility of that person's office space and the risk assessment of the office in place. Yeah. So the office lead and then that specific staff member. Action required, so signage and like clear what's not signage, like instruction of storage options
right, yeah.
for staff. Or if that is okay, then we'll need to provide like adequate ways to reach up and get it off, like steps. If that is a storage option.
Cool.
So appropriate storage or appropriate ladder to be able to get it off, and then it will be checked daily. So when you come into the office, you check it.
Yeah, and we do have that in our main office. There's only one area in our office where we've got high stacking, and that is actually a no-go area. So although it is open to that, it's deemed a no-go area for people unless you're authorised for that reason. Cool, good. What about you, Ad? Just finish on you, so it's all fair.
Yeah, I've had similar to Laura, but made it a bit more general. It was like electrical equipment.
Okay.
So obviously, there's the heater on the floor, and then loads of like cables and things like that are on and around the desk where the mug is with the liquid and stuff. So mine was also similar, saying affected by the staff within the environment. Measures in place, so electrical equipment to be stored safely in a secure place or position, plugs, extension leads to be covered, flat surface for speakers, heaters, etc. Probable likelihood, I said 3, potential consequence 2, so fairly low. responsibility of the staff working within the environment, and then obviously the action is to make sure that there is a secure place to put them, and like a secure place for like extension leads, plugs, etc. to be.
Yeah. Really good. As expected, it's set up as a false to be able to point out there are lots of different types of hazards there to help you out. And I think the key thing we want to be saying here is, as you are writing down these things, that you've got to make sure that you are implementing the actions and that everybody else in the future knows that that's why you're doing it. So like you said, they're having a secure place for this. Emily said, this policy, this is written instructions, you need to do that. That's what it is. Having markings for the heater and where that goes, having a flat floor, it's there. Double checking things. It almost, the risk assessment and it is for us, I know it is because I've seen it. The risk assessment needs to be in the hands of the people that are in that area all the time. So for example, a classroom or a centre room, they should be stuck on the wall or the door. If you go into a sports hall, you'll probably see bits and bobs like that, or in a gym. The risk assessment is almost like a guidance document as much as it being evidence for the process. So although the clip says the process is the more important bit, it totally is. Not everybody goes through that process every time they walk into that area. So by having that document visible or accessible to staff members if they're off in schools or they're off doing whatever, is really important, because then they've got something to follow, and if they're not sure, that's what it is. Plus you as managers, you have that as a direction saying, come on, what you're doing stacking 10 boxes on top of that filing cabinet like that, you know that's dangerous. Okay, and these are just the other examples here. Nobody picked the guillotine, which is quite funny. So
I didn't even know I couldn't even tell what that was.
It's okay, it's a picture. Big sharp knife.
Go and help a staff member very quickly with some kit, but I've dialed in on my phone anyway, so I'll still be on. So
risk assessment process then. So this is the process here that we're looking at that you guys need to follow. It's quite self-explanatory really, and you do it anyway, but for people listening in on the recording, it's a stage process. You just need to ensure that your starting point, that you find any previous written assessments, risk assessments, because if you're coming into SSG, there will have been a risk assessment for a project that has pre-existed, or an activity or a venue we've used before. So find it if it's in place. If it's not, then obviously you're starting from scratch. Next one, select the correct template. So we have set structured templates that are there for and help guide people through specific facilities and venues, maybe a specific activity, or even a kind of person of interest. So yes, we'll do risk assessments on activity as a hazard, but if you're working within training, for example, or even activities, we may do a risk assessment against a person participating because they're returning with a specific illness, or they may have been in have a criminal conviction, for example, and we'll do a risk assessment on them. May even be that they're pregnant, and we need to make sure that we formally risk assess them doing their job at work to make sure we've got everything in place to support that person through their pregnancy without putting any potential risk to them. Number 3, ensure you are able to walk through. And what we mean by that is, if the facility is there, physically get up and go. Okay. If it's an activity, have you got footage of that activity that you could watch that's previously happened? If not, seek other information. So talk to the people who have delivered it before, or do a bit of research on that. Make sure that you are actually putting yourself through that scenario, and you're walking through the situation to make sure that all hazards are considered. Okay. You also need to leave plenty of time before the activity undertakes or commences. So we're not doing a risk assessment 20 minutes before an activity day happens, because if there is an action that needs implementing and that involves hiring a piece of kit or getting somebody specialistly trained or whatever, it's going to take more than 20 minutes. We can't run if the severity is too high. Fully complete the risk assessment template. So it's quite often that we'll go through the process and then think, oh yeah, I'll just jot this down and I'll do it later. Well, we need to do it there and then. Actually do it as you're doing the process. So if it's pen written, fine. As long as it's legible and as long as it's saved in the right place, because the risks will always change and the hazards will always be changeable, but that's why it's a working document and we need to keep revisiting risk assessments. But we also need to make sure that you don't forget something which was a little bit obscure and you saw it because you're experts, but a new staff member didn't see it. For example, a swimming pool light. Okay, inexperienced people wouldn't necessarily pick up on that until maybe they're in the water or it's too late. Experienced staff will, because it'll be one of the first things we check: corners of swimming pools, lights, things like that. You then go on to, once a hazard's been identified, ensure that actions, and apologies, that's a bit blurry, actions are completed and follow-up checks are made to ensure the risk is lowered and justified. So if you've done the risk assessment, you've asked somebody to fix the light in the pool, you've got to follow up on that to check it's been done. Sign it off, perfect. Don't turn up to the pool as parents and children are coming in to swim and think, oh, it's not been done. Because actually we picked it out, we should chase up the contractor or the school or whatever to make sure it's done. And again, that goes back to point 3 or 4 where we've got to leave enough time to do these. Have the risk assessment signed off by a trained employee management level. So you're all managers. If you are listening to this and you've been asked to go away and do, say, a venue and do a risk assessment of that, it's not that you're not trusted. In fact, you are. It's just we need to make sure we've got another pair of eyes on that just for human error, just to make sure and ask and pose the questions that you may not be able to pose to yourself. So it's common practice that you would just pass it to a management within your team. Save the original in a central location. So there's been different locations for activities and for training and for office and central office spaces. What I've now done is I've now created, and this is in the process, hence why you guys will have all received hopefully emails around accessing networks. There is a central space inside the leadership and management. It's called statutory, and in there's health and safety, and that's where risk assessments, you can just save all of them. So you as managers know that's where the signed off risk assessments are, and the efficiencies of that is somebody needs that, but they didn't write it themselves. They don't need to come and find you, chase you, call you to find where it is. It's just there. That's a point of contact. And then make sure that all risk assessments are shared with all involved. It's the last point and it's the most important. Okay, I know we're very good at doing this. The process that you go through to do a risk assessment is really important. Okay, and the more you do it, there is a chance of becoming quite complacent with it, because you become experienced and you become aware of the things which to a novice would be quite major, and you become a bit conditioned to these things being a risk. So we need to make sure that we don't lose complacency and we share that, and we don't assume that everybody is aware that this risk assessment is so important. Okay, because again, if something, touch wood it doesn't, if it goes wrong, externals will look at our risk assessment. We will then say at management level, yeah, it's there. We did the process. Why didn't it happen, Joe Bloggs? And Joe Bloggs goes, I didn't know. I didn't know I needed to check the lighting in the pool. Well, if they've not seen the risk assessment template and the written out form, it goes back up to management again saying, right, accountability sits there. hence why we should have it in almost operational documents, and I'm sure you do. You send it out to team leads and things, and anyone listening, it should be stuck onto doors and walls of venues, or in emergency fire procedures and sign-in books. So, as always, any questions? Whistle stop me talking for 55 minutes. Just recapping then quite quickly. Okay, if you want to look at the kind of the outcomes we've looked at, we've identified the reasons for a risk assessment, why we actually have to have it. We've looked at having a go, even completing a risk assessment, what that entails, how we've got to look at the likelihood against the severity, also how we've got to be really specific around what the hazard is rather than the general risk, and then run through the process for completing. So the final 8 steps that we would look at for that. 1 to 8 could be done quite quickly in an hour. It may be that 1 to 4 gets done and then we need actions, and that could take a week. So there is no set time frame for that. It's just a working process that we use. So have a look. Hopefully you're able to say that it's been useful for you, that you've increased your knowledge, your confidence, even maybe even a little bit of your understanding. And just at the end, as always, again, PowerPoint will be available. This is where sources of information you can find. An IOSH training manual is what we're at. Okay.
Are you going to send this? Can you send this PowerPoint out to us?